Imagine a historical figure who didn't just witness one of the most tumultuous revolutions in history, but helped write the script for it. I mean, literally.
Right.
An actor who becomes a powerful politician, a poet whose words become actual law, a man who was ambitious enough to try and rename time itself, and who then dies alongside one of the biggest names of the Reign of Terror.
That's the radical change we are diving into today. We're peeling back the layers on Philippe François Nazaire Fabre d'Églantine, a figure who I think just embodies the intoxicating promise and, well, the ultimate moral squalor of the French Revolution's most intense phase.
Okay.
The mission of this deep dive is to really unpack the sources on this multi-talented, complex, and ultimately tragic figure. And we want to focus intensely on that strange and often contradictory intersection of his artistic life and his political life.
Because for him, they weren't separate things at all.
Not at all. For Fabre, they were entirely inseparable, two sides of the same rapidly spinning revolutionary coin.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when you look at his resume, it's a study in dramatic, almost unbelievable extremes. He was a professional actor who toured the provinces, a celebrated dramatist, a poet, and eventually a highly powerful Montagnard politician. But the two things he is most famous for today seem wildly, almost schizophrenically disparate. On one hand, he invented the lyrical, nature-based names of the months in the French Republican calendar, names like Floréal, the month of flowers, and Thermidor, the month of heat.
Beautiful names.
Absolutely beautiful. And on the other hand, he wrote a simple, utterly timeless song that remains a popular French nursery rhyme. Il pleut, bergère. It is raining, shepherdess.
It's the ultimate revolutionary contradiction, isn't it? I mean, here's a figure trying to impose rational, systemic, radical, nature-based change on the entire organization of time for a nation.
A huge top-down project.
While also leaving behind a legacy of pure, simple, sentimental folk art. The two things just don't seem to compute.
So what does this all mean? The core question for us, and for you, the listener, is this. How did a touring actor with literary aspirations, who initially struggled so mightily to find a foothold in the Parisian literary scene, rise up to become a key political player, Georges Danton's private secretary, no less?
Right, the inner circle.
In the inner radical circle of the revolution, only to meet the exact same tragic fate as his powerful allies. We're tracing that improbable path from the stage lights of a provincial theater to the very real scaffold of the guillotine.
To truly understand the trajectory of Fabre, we have to recognize that he was driven by this powerful, almost desperate need for recognition and fame.
It's all about ambition.
Completely.
Well,
Philippe François Nazaire Fabre was born in Carcassonne, Aude, in 1750. His original family name was just Fabre. He wasn't born into the elite. He was a climber, constantly trying to escape his provincial roots.
And the d'Églantine. It sounds incredibly grand, almost like a stage name, but it actually has a purely literary origin story, which I think speaks volumes about his priorities from day one.
Exactly. The addition of d'Églantine was a self-styled commemoration. He was marking a significant early achievement, one that he clearly felt validated his poetic ambitions.
So what was it?
He received a silver wild rose, the French word for wild rose being églantine, as a literary prize from Clémence Isor at the Academy of the Jeux Floraux in Toulouse.
Okay, so the Jeux Floraux, what was that exactly, for people who haven't heard of it?
Well, it was a very prestigious literary competition in the south of France, sort of the poetic Olympics of the region.
Yeah.
Winning a prize there was a real feather in the cap for a young, ambitious poet.
So it's important to clarify this was not a noble title, right? He wasn't pretending to be an aristocrat.
No, not at all. He wasn't claiming aristocracy, but you could argue he was claiming intellectual aristocracy. He physically adopted a poetic trophy as part of his identity.
It showed a deep, almost over-the-top yearning for literary recognition right from the very start. He didn't just want to be known, he wanted to be known for his words.
And that yearning fueled his early career, but it definitely did not guarantee success. The sources detail his early struggles in Paris.
Right.
After traveling extensively in the provinces as an actor, often, barely making a living, he arrived in the capital determined to conquer the Parisian stage, which was the ultimate test for any French dramatist. He married Marie Strasbourg Nicole Godin in 1778 and continued his writing efforts, including a poem called Étude de la Nature in 1783. But the establishment, they just resisted him.
This is crucial context for his later political radicalization, isn't it? Because rejection is often a powerful engine for revolutionary fervor. He tried twice definitively to break into the established theater system and failed both times.
Yes, His comedy, Les gens de lettres, Le Provincial à Paris, which he produced in 1787, was just. It was unsuccessful. And this was a crucial time when Parisian theaters were still heavily influenced by old regime tastes and societal expectations.
So what he was writing didn't fit the mold.
Exactly. Fabre's style, which was already beginning to incorporate a sharper, more critical eye towards social hypocrisy, simply wasn't what the established audience or the critics wanted to see.
And it wasn't just comedy, right? His failure extended to serious drama. The tragedy, Augusta.
Yes, Augusta. It was produced at the highly prestigious, state-backed Théâtre Français, and it also proved to be a failure. This wasn't just a bad review. This was a personal and professional rejection by the central institution of French dramatic art.
You can just feel the bitterness building up.
Oh, you really see that pattern of rejection fueling a deep-seated rivalry. He had other works, like Présomptueux in 1789, that failed to win audience applause, especially when you compare it to the success his rival Jean-François Collin de Harleville was receiving for works like Château en Espagne.
So he's watching someone else succeed with what he probably considers inferior work.
Exactly. I mean, imagine the psychological toll. You believe you're a genius, you literally change your name to commemorate a poetic triumph, and yet you're forced to watch these other talents succeed while you remain an unsuccessful touring actor, basically drowning in Paris.
So he was struggling professionally just as the political atmosphere was heating up. Here's where the narrative of Fabre d'Églantine gets really interesting. Despite these early struggles, or maybe because of them, because the existing structures had so completely failed him, the sources highlight this major turning point. The revolution wasn't just a political change. For him, it was a gigantic national stage that he couldn't get access to before. He transitioned almost overnight from being this unsuccessful touring actor to being recognized as one of the most important playwrights during the French Revolution.
That's the key. The old regime rejected his art. The revolution validated his ideology. The world he was trying to critique through his drama suddenly became the world he was actively trying to tear down and rebuild through politics and, well, political theater. That rapid, dramatic transition in his career is the defining engine of his life from 1789 onward.
So the moment Fabre truly found literary and theatrical success coincided perfectly with the political upheaval. His most popular play was Philinte, ou La Suite du Misanthrope, which premiered in 1790. Now, this wasn't just a new play. It was marketed as a continuation of Molière's 17th century classic, Le Misanthrope. Why use Molière?
Well, because using Molière gave him instant cultural legitimacy while also allowing him to subvert tradition. It was a very clever move.
So he's borrowing brand recognition, essentially.
He is. And what's fascinating here is that Fabre didn't just write a simple sequel. He injected revolutionary dogma directly into one of the most beloved works of the French canon. The sources clarify that Fabre fundamentally shifted the thematic meaning of the original characters to align with the new political realities.
Okay, so how did he do that?
In Fabre's version, the hero of the piece, Philinte, who Molière had painted as the reasonable, balanced man, was recast not as reasonable, but as a pure and simple egotist.
Wow. Okay, so this is where the play becomes a political litmus test, a kind of pamphlet delivered through dialogue. In the revolutionary context, where virtue and political allegiance were absolutely everything, Fabre made sure the audience understood who the villains were.
Precisely. His character Alceste, who represents the patriot citizen in Fabre's sequel, receives the highest praise and admiration. Meanwhile, the seemingly polite and moderate Philinte is explicitly depicted as a dangerous aristocrat in disguise.
A dangerous aristocrat in disguise. I mean, that's not subtle.
There's no subtlety.
Right.
It's a remarkable example of how culture was weaponized during this period. The stage for Fabre was no longer a place for mere entertainment or even for gentle satire. It was a mechanism for political clarification and moral instruction.
And he used it to settle old scores too, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He even used the preface of the play, which is usually a space for artistic reflection, not just to explain his choices, but as a space for brutal political score settling. He specifically used it to satirize L'Optimiste by his old rival, Jean-François Collin d'Harleville. Fabre was using his newfound success to solidify his standing both as an artist and, crucially, as a true patriot.
But his ambitions went far beyond just one successful play. His dramatic philosophy was revolutionary in itself. He believed that the entire old regime society, and crucially its comedy, which relied on hidden motives, social games, disguise, were utterly bankrupt.
Yes.
He saw his mission as redeeming French drama itself, creating a theater worthy of the new republic.
Yes, he sought to fashion a necessary, a vital place for theater within the new revolutionary culture. His approach was to develop a new form of drama that actively promoted the new social order, founded on equality and fraternity. This wasn't passive entertainment. This was civic religion, revolutionary instruction. It had to be didactic, moral, and absolutely unambiguous.
And he didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. He found his philosophical framework by building upon one of the most powerful critiques of the time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's deep-seated critique of theatricality. This is critical. Why did Rousseau hate theater, and how did Fabre twist that rejection into an embrace?
That is the essential insight here. It's a bit complex, but Rousseau argued that theater, by its very nature, was immoral and corrupting for a republic that was supposed to be based on virtue.
Why? Because it's fake.
Essentially, yes. For Rousseau, theater was fundamentally about illusion, about characters hiding their true intentions, about private interest being celebrated over the public good. It relied on dissimulation, disguise, and therefore was inherently opposed to the revolutionary concept of public virtue and transparency.
So if Rousseau says theater is based on lies and therefore poisons the republic, how does Fabre, a playwright, respond to that? That's a direct attack on his entire profession.
Well, this is the genius of his argument. Fabre argued that the old regime theater was indeed bankrupt because it celebrated those lies and disguises. But he proposed that the revolutionary theater could be regenerated if it adopted the very principle Rousseau demanded of public life: transparency.
That concept of transparency is so central to the revolutionary ethos, erasing secrets, eliminating disguise, forcing public virtue to be displayed openly. For Fabre, putting that on stage was essential. But how do you create transparent theater? Isn't all theater based on some level of illusion?
Fabre advocated for a radical shift in how characters were presented. The playwright, he argued, must immediately expose the true moral and political allegiance of every single character. There can be no ambiguity.
So the audience is in on it from the start.
Exactly. In Philanthe, the audience knows from the first scene that Philanthe is the dangerous aristocrat in disguise. The dramatic tension doesn't come from discovering the truth, but from watching the patriot citizen Alceste force that truth into the open. The play becomes a public exercise in rooting out hypocrisy, making the audience participants in this act of revolutionary purification.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Fabre had this profoundly regenerative role for theater in mind. He believed that a regenerated revolutionary theatrical culture would redeem the work of art and ultimately generate a new, virtuous, revolutionary society.
It's a profound reversal of typical thinking, isn't it? He wasn't waiting for political institutions like the National Convention to shape the theater through censorship or funding. He thought the theater itself, by enforcing transparency and promoting virtue, would shape the political institutions and the moral character of the entire nation.
It's an incredibly ambitious philosophy for a man who, just a few years earlier, had suffered the ultimate professional indignity, a tragedy flopping at the Théâtre Français.
He took his artistic failure under the old regime and turned it into his defining revolutionary principle. It's an amazing pivot.
Having found his voice and his platform through politically charged drama, Fabre d'Églantine's transition into outright political leadership was, well, it was rapid and absolute. He stepped off the revolutionary stage and directly into the core engine of the terror.
His political affiliations are impressive, and they show he was deeply integrated into the most radical wing of the revolution, the Montagnards. He served as both president and secretary of the powerful club of the Cordeliers.
Which was Danton's stronghold.
Danton's stronghold, exactly. And he was also a member of the Jacobin Club, the ultimate center of revolutionary power at the time.
And most critically, Georges Danton, one of the three giants of the revolution alongside Robespierre and Marat, chose Fabre as his private secretary. This association put Fabre right in the inner circle, moving him from a struggling artist to a key manipulator of political power.
He secured a seat in the National Convention, serving from 1792 to 1794. And his voting record. It really confirms his radical commitment. When the question of King Louis VI's fate was put to the convention, he voted decisively for the king's death.
No hesitation.
No hesitation. Furthermore, he supported the maximum legislation.
We should pause there and provide some context for the listener. What was the maximum, and why did supporting it place him firmly on the extreme left of the political spectrum?
The maximum was essentially a revolutionary measure imposing strict price controls on essential goods like grain, flour, and eventually a wider range of commodities. Politically, it was a crucial measure for the Montagnards, who drew their support from the Parisian working class, the sans-culottes, who were suffering terribly from wartime inflation and food shortages.
So this was about keeping the people of Paris fed and on their side.
Exactly. Supporting the maximum meant prioritizing the needs of the poor and the stability of the state over the principles of a free market. It was a fiercely debated, highly interventionist measure, and Fabre's support showed his commitment to the popular radical cause.
And that radical commitment extended to judicial measures as well.
It did. He backed a law that allowed for summary executions, which essentially streamlined the process of the Revolutionary Tribunal. The sources are absolutely clear on this. He was a bitter enemy of the Girondins, the slightly more moderate Federalist faction whom the Montagnards eventually purged. Fabre was actively participating in the machinery of the Terror.
And his literary side never went away, even in politics.
No, his commitment was not just political, it was literary. Following the assassination of the ultra-radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat on July 13, 1793, Fabre published a piece titled Portrait de l'ami du peuple, a eulogy for Marat. He was constantly connecting his political actions with his literary identity. He was fighting the political fight with the pen, just as he had promised the regenerated theater would do.
But the lasting mark he left on the historical record, the thing that literally changed the way every French citizen experienced time, was his involvement in the French Republican calendar. This is truly extraordinary. How does an actor get tasked with rewriting the universal concept of time?
It's a fascinating reflection of the Revolution's hubris and its commitment to total change. In 1793, the Gregorian calendar, seen as tainted by its Christian monarchical origins, was abolished. Fabre sat on the committee entrusted with creating the replacement.
Now, we need to be careful with attribution here, right? He didn't design the whole thing himself.
That's a key point. The calendar's fundamental structure was designed by the politician and agronomist Gilbert Rome, but Fabre d'Églantine is usually credited with its fame because he invented the magnificent, poetic, nature-based names of the months.
And the structural changes were designed not just to be secular, but actively anti-religious. The calendar featured a 10-day week, known as a decade.
Yes, and that was specifically designed so that Sunday would be forgotten as a religious day. That is an immense imposition on daily life.
It's a radical act of cultural engineering.
Completely. The 10-day week meant that there were 3 decades in a month. The 10th day, the Decadi, replaced the Christian Sunday as the day of rest and civic celebration. The revolutionary government mandated that all citizens must observe the Decadi.
This must have had a massive impact on workers.
A huge impact. They effectively worked 9 days and rested 1, instead of working 6 days and resting 1, as under the Gregorian system. It was designed to erase 7-day cycles and the religious memory associated with them. Fabre contributed names not only for the months, but even for the days within the decade, like primidi, duodi, tridi, and so on.
So he was literally providing the new vocabulary for the nation's daily existence. But his most famous contribution was the naming of the months. What was his philosophy behind these conventions?
His philosophy was to tie French society directly back to the land and the seasons, moving entirely away from history or religious figures. The months were named after the intrinsic qualities of the seasons and were organized into 3 groups: autumn, winter, and spring-summer. This was a rationalist, agrarian rejection of the divine.
He formalized this reasoning in his report on the subject to the National Convention on October 24, 1793. And this report is perhaps the most eloquent expression of revolutionary ideology applied to daily life, replacing abstract concepts with sensory and natural observation.
He stated that the Commission's goal was nothing less than to substitute for visions of ignorance the realities of reason, and for sacerdotal prestige the truth of nature. They wanted to anchor the Republic in observable, universal natural law, not in superstitious tradition.
And the practical application was specifically designed to exalt labor and agriculture.
Absolutely. He explicitly aimed to exalt the agricultural system by marking the days and the divisions of the year with intelligible or visible signs taken from agriculture and rural life. The idea was that every time a peasant or a citizen referred to a month, they would be reminded of the specific physical labor or state of nature appropriate to that time.
Let's go through some of them because they are so evocative. We have the autumn months, Vendémiaire,
the month of the grape harvest, then Brumaire, the month of mists, and Frimaire, the month of cold or frost.
and the winter months.
Nivose, from snow, pluviose, from rain, and ventose, from wind. These are harsh, tangible meteorological conditions. Very real.
And his spring contributions, the months that sound the most poetic to me.
Germinal,
Germination,
floreal,
blooming.
and prairial, for meadows, often associated with the first hay harvest. He was translating the French landscape and climate into a poetic chronology. This wasn't just poetry. It was propaganda aimed at rooting the citizen's identity in the soil of the Republic, making time itself a constant reminder of rural productivity and rationality. He was, in a sense, the poet laureate of reason. So Fabre d'Églantine had reached this pinnacle of ideological influence. He was Danton's powerful right-hand man, a celebrated revolutionary poet, and the architect of the rational calendar. And this is the moment in the narrative where the fatal flaw, that contradiction between the idealist philosopher of transparency and the morally weak politician, just violently emerges.
The sources tell us that his undoing was not his radicalism. That was expected, even celebrated, but a deeply venal and surprisingly complex financial fraud known as the East India Company scandal. This is where the narrative tension needs to peak, because this crime ultimately brought down the entire Dantonist faction.
This is truly the closing act of the tragic comedy that was Fabre's life. The scandal centered on the liquidation of the powerful French East India Company in October 1793. The company was being wound down in accordance with anti-capitalist legislation designed to purify the new republic of old financial excesses.
A very noble goal, on the surface.
On the surface. And this liquidation was being overseen by a committee of the convention.
Okay, let's unpack the scheme step by step, because it was audacious and required high-level political access. The initial decree for liquidation was legitimate, but a cabal of convention members, including Fabre, forged and inserted a falsified article into the decree after it was officially voted on and signed.
Yes, that's the critical part. The forged article altered the details of the liquidation process to make it vastly more advantageous to the former company directors. The scam was brilliant and cynical. The directors of the company were then blackmailed by Fabre and his co-conspirators.
Blackmailed how?
They were forced to turn over a massive $500,000 profit, a sum equivalent to millions today, from this manipulated liquidation exercise directly to the cabal of convention members responsible for the fraud. It was pure, high-level corruption disguised in bureaucratic procedure.
The man who championed the concept of political transparency on the revolutionary stage was caught orchestrating a dense financial forgery designed entirely for personal, secret enrichment. The irony is just staggering.
And the exposure came not through an audit, but through panic and betrayal. The whistleblower was François Chabot, a Montagnard deputy and a former Capuchin friar who was involved in the conspiracy, but whose nerve broke under the escalating atmosphere of the terror.
You can just picture the scene. Dramatize that moment for us. This happened the morning of November 14, 1793. Chabot decides the only way to save himself from the guillotine is to confess. But he doesn't go to the police. He goes straight to the ultimate symbol of revolutionary incorruptibility.
Chabot literally burst into Maximilien Robespierre's bedroom, dragging the incorruptible leader from his bed in the pre-dawn hours. He was frantic, waving 100,000 livres in a signet notes, the revolutionary paper currency, which he claimed proved a royalist plot.
He's trying to frame it as something else.
He is. He confessed that this money was given to him by royalist plotters, specifically to buy Fabre d'Églantine's vote, along with the votes of others, to facilitate the stock liquidation.
It's an unbelievable scene. A former friar panicking, waving a massive wad of cash in the face of the one man who preached virtue above all else, and he's blaming his conspirator Fabre for bringing him into the plot. Chabot tried to paint himself as an unwitting dupe corrupted by monarchist gold, but his ultimate goal was to sacrifice Fabre and save his own skin.
And Robespierre, well, Robespierre was the personification of revolutionary virtue. He viewed financial criminality, especially when masked by political zeal, as the absolute worst crime. In 1794, once Robespierre gained sufficient evidence, he publicly denounced Fabre.
And what was his language?
He specifically targeted Fabre for what he viewed as a particular heinous crime, calling it criminality disguised by patriotism.
Criminality disguised by patriotism. That phrase, criminality disguised, perfectly inverted Fabre's own philosophy of theatrical transparency. The man who wanted no masks in theater was found wearing the most dangerous mask of all in politics. The mask of the patriot.
The political fallout was immediate and devastating, far beyond just Fabre's reputation. Fabre was arrested on January 12, 1794, by order of the Committee of Public Safety, charged with a malversation and forgery related to the East India Company.
And this arrest wasn't just about him, it had wider implications.
It was critical because it was the beginning of the end for the entire moderate wing of the Montagnards, the Dantonist faction. The sources note that this arrest struck a hard blow to the Montagnards and sent them on their way to extinction in the convention. Fabre's crime exposed deep-seated corruption at the heart of the ruling faction, providing the moral pretext Robespierre needed to launch his final push for political purity, a push that would ultimately devour Danton himself just weeks later.
During his trial, the dramatist tried one final performance, attempting to twist the facts around, accusing other people, desperately trying to shift blame to Chabot and others, but he was unsuccessful.
No. His theatrical tricks and his ability to spin a narrative could not save him from the unforgiving logic of the Revolutionary Tribunal.
And so he died under the guillotine on April 5, 1794, alongside his mentor, Georges Danton, and the other Dantonists. But even facing the scaffold, the actor in him couldn't help but add some dramatic flair to his final scene.
This is where the story becomes folklore, really. According to the popular account, Fabre showed the greatest calmness right up to the end. And what did he do? He sang his own well-known song, that simple nursery rhyme, il pleut, bergère, rentre tes blancs moutons.
He even distributed his handwritten poems to the people lining the route on his way to the scaffold. A final, beautiful, simple literary effort, contrasting so starkly with the revolutionary dogma he had espoused.
But the sources also provide a very dark piece of dialogue regarding his final moments with Danton, a conversation that encapsulates the entire tragedy of their shared ambition. Legend has it that Fabre was complaining bitterly about the injustice done to him, the irony of the revolutionary poet being undone by a simple financial crime, as they rode in the cart to the scaffold.
And this prompted Danton's supreme, biting sarcasm. What did Danton say?
Danton looked at the complaining poet, who was so obsessed with his own injustice and his final verses, and supposedly replied,
Des vers, avant un jour, tu en feras plus que tu n'en voudras.
That's devastating, and we need to clarify the language for anyone listening. For non-French speakers, vers is the word that creates the entire dark joke. It can mean either verses, the poems Fabre was so desperately trying to distribute.
Or it can mean worms.
It's the ultimate revolutionary mic drop. It really is. Danton, facing his own end, was reminding the poet that in less than a week, he would be providing far more poetry, or far more likely, being consumed by a greater number of worms than he desired. It was a truly fitting, dark, and cynical joke for the ultimate revolutionary ending, contrasting the grand aspirations of the mind with the brutal reality of physical dissolution.
Despite the ignoble circumstances of his death, executed as a corrupt forger, Fabre de Glantin's artistic ideas about revolutionary regeneration didn't immediately vanish, which is kind of surprising.
No, they didn't. The immediate aftermath of his death, though completely overshadowed by the subsequent fall of Robespierre, ironically led to a brief literary resurgence for him. His posthumous play, Les Précepteurs, which means The Tutors, was performed just a few months after his execution on September 17, 1794.
And how was it received?
It met with an enthusiastic reception.
The enthusiasm might have been due to its thematic content, right, as it drew heavily on the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's famous work, Émile, or on education. So it seems his final work carried forward that revolutionary ideal of a regenerated society and education that he had championed earlier.
That literary success confirms that even if his political legacy ended in corruption and execution, his dramatic philosophy that theater should be a moral instrument for education and regeneration was genuine and resonated with the culture he helped to create. He was attempting to leave a lasting blueprint for a moral citizenry.
Other plays are also notable footnotes in his career, cementing his position as a fixture in revolutionary theater. These include Le Convalescent de Qualité, or The Distinguished Invalid, from 1791, and L'Intrigue épistolaire, The Epistolary Plot, also from 1791.
And it's interesting to note that L'Intrigue épistolaire supposedly included a depiction of the famous painter Jean-Baptiste Greuze, who was highly regarded for his moral and sentimental scenes. This further links Fabre's dramatic output to the era's obsession with morality and virtue.
Even as he was engaging in the backroom political machinations that would destroy him, the contradiction is always there.
It's always there.
And his literary work wasn't entirely lost to time. His collected works, the Œuvres mêlées et posthumes, miscellaneous and posthumous works, were first published in Paris in 1802 across 2 volumes.
Which is significant. I mean, he went from being a failed playwright, rejected by the old regime, to having his collected, edited works published shortly after his death. This suggests his contribution to revolutionary culture was taken seriously by subsequent generations of writers.
And his dramatic life, the struggle, the sudden political rise, the corruption, and the tragic swift death, has naturally lent itself to fiction. His complexity makes him a perfect foil for exploring the contradictions of the revolution.
Absolutely. He appears as a major character in Hilary Mantel's acclaimed novel about the French Revolution, A Place of Greater Safety.
Right, a key figure in that book. And he also pops up as a secondary character in Emma Orgy's novel, The Way of the Scarlet Pimpernel, suggesting that even in the popular imagination a century later, his persona was still viewed as a quintessential, if flawed, figure of the terror.
He became a literary figure of the very history he tried to rename. He is remembered less for his rational calendar and more for the dramatic, emotional, and, corrupt choices he made.
So we have traced the improbable journey of Philippe François Nazaire Fabre de Glantine. It's a story that started with a Silver Wild Rose Prize and ended with a dark joke about worms. He was a man who sought to revolutionize both the aesthetic of the theater and the fundamental structure of the calendar, ultimately embodying the explosive ambition and the cynical, fatal corruption of the French Revolution's most radical phase.
The contrast is truly stark, isn't it? On one side, you have the idealist Fabre, the one who penned the calendar report, exalting the agricultural system, attempting to replace sacerdotal prestige with the truth of nature.
A structure designed to be pure, rational, and transparent.
Exactly. And on the other, you have the politician Fabre, whose undoing was the ignoble crime of malversation and forgery related to corporate fraud, a crime built on secrecy, illusion, and greed.
It's the purity of ideology betrayed instantly by the squalor of human greed.
Which Robespierre correctly identified as criminality disguised by patriotism. That's the perfect epitaph for him.
He tried to etch his name into the very fabric of time by creating a rational, nature-based calendar designed to force the French people to forget the religious past by erasing Sundays and marking time by seasons. Yet decades later, when the calendar was itself abolished, we chiefly remember him for one simple, enduring children's rhyme, il pleut, bergère, a song of pure, simple sentimentality and the political crime that swiftly and dramatically erased his future.
Which raises an important question, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive concludes. Well, what does this reversal say about the enduring power of simple, emotional, relatable art versus ambitious, often oppressive, imposed political systems? Fabre tried to legislate virtue and rename the seasons of the year, but his most reliable legacy survives in a four-line song about a shepherdess and her sheep, a song that requires no political context or philosophical understanding to endure. Perhaps in the end, the simple, honest verse is more revolutionary than the calendar designed to change the world.